Hello everyone and welcome back to another episode of The Subcontinent. Our program aims to address the ongoing issues across the subcontinent that affect the governments, communities, organizations and the region as a whole. As usual, we will try to explore and explain its geopolitics, untangle the arguments from different perspectives and make the alternative voices heard with extra help from experts and people.
In this edition of The Subcontinent, we are going to talk about revelations about the Indian government using Israeli military-grade spyware to hack into phones and other digital devices of dozens of citizens and high-ranking officials. And we shall take a look at the repercussions of the Pegasus scandal for Modi's administration following allegations of treason and compromising national security.
A group of media agencies has recently revealed a long list of journalists, activists, politicians and a lot of other public figures that were targeted by their governments using a high-tech Israeli spyware. The government of Narendra Modi is one of them. The allegations that these governments were paying hefty sums of money for annual subscriptions and extra fees to an Israeli company for illegal surveillance of citizens have started protests in many countries. But the Pegasus scandal may have grave consequences for the Indian government, something as big as the Watergate for the United States.
The Pegasus project is the umbrella name of a global consortium of media groups that was formed to probe if governments used the Israeli malware Pegasus for espionage on journalists, politicians, activists, business people, and many other public figures. Over 80 journalists from 17 media organizations spent several months analyzing and investigating the alleged spying abuses.
I'm an investigative journalist. That's the only interesting thing that I do. I think those who surveilled me and my colleague András, they were after my sources. They wanted to access the drafts, the stories that we were preparing, so that we don't break any news that they are not aware of. I think they also tried to find out if they can find anything that could be used as a compromise on us, but obviously there was nothing.
Pegasus was never a secret. It was ostensibly marketed for surveillance of serious crimes and terrorism. But in 2020, it became a scandal. A list of 50,000 phone numbers of potential targets of the spyware was leaked to the journalism NGO Forbidden Stories.
The question that really arises is who is doing it. Now, if you look at the various points, which is journalists getting tapped, opposition leaders getting tapped, even government ministers are getting tapped. So who could be gaining out of it? One obvious answer is the government itself will be gaining out of it, right? And therefore, the government is a potential suspect in terms of running this. One school of thought is that, well, the government does have the right to surveil because that's part of the job of the government to make sure that you surveil those who are against the interests of the country and make sure that the country stays safe.
The analysis revealed that the list contained the numbers of leading opposition politicians, human rights activists, lawyers, and other political dissidents. The International Investigative Journalism Initiative says India is among the 45 countries using the malware developed by the cyber arms group NSO, which is an Israeli company previously owned by American private equity firm Francisco Partners and is overseen by the Israeli Ministry of Military Affairs.
If the reports are true, it means New Delhi is running a mass surveillance program to keep tabs on its opposition journalists, activists and leaders along with its own ministers and key officials. Implications of these revelations can be huge for Indians. It may change India's domestic political environment, which in turn can have drastic effects on the country's foreign politics. It can also influence citizens' view and trust on their relationships with governmental institutions.
Pegasus can be covertly installed on mobile phones and other digital devices to take over its operations and track every element. The malware is a Trojan horse named after the mythical winged horse Pegasus flying through the air, infecting phones. Since its 2016 version, Pegasus was capable of offline conversations, reading text messages, gathering data from call logs, location tracking, collecting passwords and browsing history, harvesting information from apps, including but not limited to communications apps, iMessage, Gmail, Viber, Facebook, WhatsApp, Telegram, and Skype. The 2021 Pegasus revelations suggest that the current Pegasus software can exploit all devices running almost all versions of iOS and Android.
I think the question would probably start from the past of our privacy. I think by the time it was 2005, 2006, we had smartphones all over the place. We had deep penetration of digital and access to digital. We had already lost privacy. All that Pegasus is doing is showing the mirror to us. We have completely and fundamentally lost our privacy. There was a statement, in fact, from Larry Ellison, the CEO of Oracle, saying that privacy is a figment of imagination. It does not exist anymore. And with Pegasus, all that it's saying is what has already happened in the last decade or so, if not more. And as I wrote in one of the newspapers or magazines, that Pegasus can see exactly what you're seeing, can hear exactly what you're hearing, can read all the messages that you have, and therefore you fundamentally are not left with any privacy on the digital platform.
Rather than using a specific way of attack, Pegasus is a suite of exploits that uses many vulnerabilities in the system. Its infection vector includes clicking links, the Photos app, the Music app, and iMessage. But Pegasus also uses zero-click attacks, which means it can infect and run phones without any interaction from the victim. It gets installed by a missed call or a message, and the individual is not even required to open a link.
According to media reports, the prices to use the spyware are extremely high. Governments must pay hundreds of thousands of dollars in annual fees, plus some extra charges, to the Israeli cyber intelligence firm for surveillance over a number of phones. So what justifies paying such high amounts to hack phones of a few people related to politically sensitive issues? And what kind of intelligence do the governments hope to get?
Documents submitted before a U.S. court indicate that an amount of $8 million was the initial agreed amount only to set up a Pegasus system in Ghana to spy on 25 phone numbers during 2015 and 16. The end user was supposed to pay the NSO group an annual support fee of 22% of the system consideration costs, which means $176,000 annually. According to reports, Mexico's contract was $32 million for monitoring 500 users, whereas Panama had reportedly signed to pay $13.4 million to spy on 150 devices.
I don't think it's any political threat in that sense, frankly. If I look at today's newspaper, which is a couple of days after the first news of Pegasus broke out, I don't see much of an impact coming out. There were a few days of ruckus happening in the parliament, and like in any other cases, the public has very short memory. So I don't think it's a question of survival at all. I don't even think it's a scratch on the government's position right now. I think much more will have to happen before an issue of cyber or an issue of surveillance becomes an equivalent of the Watergate, or any of the gate kind of situation. So I don't think we have reached there as of now. I don't think it has any impact on the survival of the government, and that's a far-fetched question in that sense at this stage.
According to a New York Times report, NSO Group charged $650,000 plus 17% of the total amount as an annual service fee to spy on 10 iPhone users in 2016. Emails leaked by WikiLeaks showed that the NSO Group had competitors who offered similar capabilities with lower prices to win government contracts.
The NSO Group often assigned nicknames to its operating customers. In a 2018 report by Canada-based research organization Citizen Lab, it was revealed that NSO operators associated with the Indian subcontinent were codenamed Ganges. Similarly, operators linked to activities in the Middle Eastern countries like Qatar, Oman and the UAE were just named Middle. The Ganges project included opposition leaders, union ministers, administrators such as election commissioner and heads of the Central Bureau of Investigation or the CBI, and also minority leaders.
Under the Indian law, the government is only allowed to intercept calls in certain situations such as the interests of the sovereignty and integrity of India or the security of the state and its friendly relations with foreign states or public order. These are the same restrictions imposed on free speech under the Constitution.
It's a job of the government to do surveillance on a set of people who are supposed to be perceived as inimical to the interest of the country, and therefore, a few $100,000 is really not that much of a cost compared to, let's say, the cost of a missile, cost of a warplane, and so on and so forth. So, if you can avoid a war through surveillance or avoid a terrorist attack through surveillance, I'm sure the taxpayers' money are getting well used. The challenge comes in when the same technology is being used for surveilling people who are not really inimical to the interests of the country, but are inimical to civilian issues, between perhaps political parties or business entities and so on and so forth, which then does not let us have our way of life, right? And therefore, the question will come up if, why is the government using taxpayer money for such surveillance? But then we don't even know whether the government is actually using taxpayers' money and is actually doing this surveillance. That's in the realm of speculation. But if this government or any government is doing so, then that's certainly not acceptable.
However, the exhaustive list leaves no sphere of India's socio-political landscape free of the Pegasus hacking. Now, India's main opposition Congress party accuses Prime Minister Modi of treason and demands an investigation into the role of Modi and his closest aide, Home Minister Amit Shah, in the scandal. The cell phones of India's top opposition leader, Rahul Gandhi, his 2 close aides, and 5 non-political friends were also compromised by Pegasus in the run-up to the 2019 national elections, which Modi won. During that election campaign, one of the election commissioners objected to Modi's polarizing speeches. His phone, as well as that of a journalist reporting his official stance, was also hacked by Pegasus.
Now, to have more insight, we are joined by Mr. Paranjoy Guha Thakurta. He is an Indian journalist, writer and a documentary maker. First of all, welcome to the program, Mr. Thakurta. As we mentioned earlier in the program, the Pegasus project, the global consortium of media organizations that investigates the Israeli spyware, says India is amongst the 45 countries using the malware developed by the Israeli group NSO. Now, do you think New Delhi is really running a mass surveillance program to keep tabs on its journalists, activists and opposition leaders, along with its own ministers and key officials?
Well, honestly, I don't know who I should believe or who I should not believe, because the Israeli group NSO claims that its software is only sold to vetted governments, and that too after the permission of the government of Israel in Tel Aviv. And they also claim that this is only meant for law enforcing agencies so that they can pick out heinous crimes like pedophilia, like drug trafficking, anti-terrorist activities, if some people are kidnapped, if some human beings are under the rubble of a collapsed building, to detect them. So they say this is all used for such purposes. But what do you do once the software is in the hands of another government or another agency? Does the NSO have any means of checking the misuse or the abuse of that software? So if there are rogue elements in another country who has got access to this software, who's using the software to spy on citizens, including the political opponents of the ruling regime in that country, and maybe judges and journalists and bureaucrats and law enforcement agencies and human rights activists and anybody. So that is a big question mark and the problematic area. Now, in 2019, when it was found that NSO software was being misused through WhatsApp and through a link sent by WhatsApp, WhatsApp is currently pursuing a legal case against NSO in a court in the United States of America and the West Coast in San Francisco. That case is currently on.
So what are the possible implications of these revelations on India's domestic and foreign politics, and also the citizens' view about the government's institutional relationships?
There are two sets of implications, one within India and one outside India. Because this does not concern India alone. There are allegedly 50,000 phone numbers in this list that has been given to Forbidden Stories, which is a Paris-based not-for-profit, non-government organization. And they have collaborated with Amnesty International, and they have a digital lab where they've examined these, some of these phones, including mine, that were allegedly hacked. Now wait, there's more to it than meets the eye. These 50,000 phones which are on the list are in 45 countries. There are 17 media organizations in different parts of the world who have collaborated on this investigation, including not just Forbidden Stories and Amnesty International, but media organizations like the Washington Post, Le Monde of France, the Guardian of the UK, The Wire in India, among others. Now, when the Minister for Home Affairs in India, Mr. Amit Shah, he says that there is an international conspiracy. The international conspiracy is to target it at India. Yes, there are a large number of names that have been verified that have come from India. And it was time that it was released on Sunday night, and on Monday morning, the monsoon session of the Parliament of India was to begin. So the government has claimed this was targeted in India, it was a conspiracy against India. But the fact is, the phone numbers are there of people belong in 45 countries. There are 17 media organizations, so I'm not so sure whether there's an international conspiracy. But if you look at the international ramifications of it, India's Prime Minister, Mr. Narendra Modi, has had very close relations with the former head of government of the US, of Israel, I beg your pardon, the former head of the government of Israel, who is not there. I mean, Mr. Bibi Netanyahu. Now the present government, that is Mr. Bennett, is now in charge. And so that's one part of the story. But we also see, we don't know, because NSO doesn't disclose the list of clients. We don't know who has purchased it. Because there is one view that among the people, or among the governments, or the law enforcing agencies, or the government agencies that has purchased it, are agencies in Saudi Arabia and also in the United Arab Emirates, who have, in the recent past, their relations with Tel Aviv has been a little less tense than in the past.
Thank you, Mr. Thakurta. Let's take a break and take a look at how the global media has covered the Indian side of this global scandal.
This is not the first time Pegasus has been linked to the targeting of journalists and human rights activists. In 2019, there was outrage in India and other countries after WhatsApp confirmed that some of its users were targeted with spyware. A total of 121 users from India, including activists, scholars, and journalists, were affected by the breach. This, experts said, suggested the involvement of state agencies in India. WhatsApp sued NSO, alleging the company was behind cyber attacks on 1,400 mobile phones involving Pegasus. Reactions from the Modi government to the revelations have been predictably hostile. Instead of receiving this information and promising, even if skeptically, a full investigation, Home Minister Amit Shah has turned to one of his favorite retorts as an explanation, that the project is an international conspiracy to derail India's development trajectory. Many of his party colleagues have also been spouting the same line, saying that the investigation has been timed to coincide with the parliament restarting again.
Welcome back, Mr. Thakurta. India's main opposition Congress party has accused Prime Minister Modi of treason and demanded an investigation into the roles of Modi and his closest aide, Home Minister Amit Shah, in the scandal. How do you think Modi will try to handle or survive this?
Only time can answer that question. So far, Prime Minister Narendra Modi and Home Minister Amit Shah have denied that they've done anything illegal. Yes, India's biggest opposition party, its leader Rahul Gandhi has accused the Prime Minister and the Home Minister of treason because they're saying you are using defense-grade spyware to spy on your own citizens, and you are and you're not saying who's bought the software, whether you bought it or not bought it, and this is akin to treason. It's akin to compromising the interests of the country. We'll have to wait and watch what happens. But so far, the government of India in New Delhi seems to be in a complete state of denial. Whether it'll continue, it has refused to accede to opposition demand for a joint parliamentary committee, or we'll have to wait and watch. There have been petitions in the Supreme Court about whether there should be a Supreme Court monitored independent investigation. It's early days as to see what would be the political fallout of this episode.
On that note, I would like to thank Mr. Thakurta for being on the program. Now, let's see how people on social media have reacted to the Indian government's large-scale surveillance scheme.
Former Indian minister and member of ruling party Subramanian Swamy says, "The government of India owes explanation to people as to who paid the Israeli firm for the Indian operation." Revant Reddy, an Indian parliamentarian and member of the main opposition party, accuses the Modi government of U-turn, saying it must be transparent on the Pegasus Snoopgate. Senior Indian journalist Sushant Singh, whose number also figures on the list, says Pegasus is a cyber weapon and a controlled defense export from Israel that India used against its own citizens. Seema Sirohi, a senior Indian journalist, says when India appears alongside countries like Saudi Arabia for using government might for the wrong reasons, something is terribly wrong.
And that was our episode on the Pegasus scandal, or revelations about the Indian government's costly collaboration with an Israeli cyber company to spy on a number of opposition public figures and politicians, as well as its influence on the future of Modi's government. To watch a melange of the best bits and pieces of our show and more subcontinental updates, follow us on social media platforms, and don't forget to give us your feedback. We shall meet again, same time, same day next week. So till then, take care.